Hello, my name is Rep Tom Green, and I'm going to explain today a game that I designed based on women's flat track roller derby. And I was actually a roller derby referee for a couple of years with the Dallas Derby Devils. And this game is based on my experience with roller derby. What you're looking at here are all prototype pieces. Each dice has one side with a star on it, two sides with a skull on it, and three faces have a picture of a skater. We'll get back to that later. All the components are basically made up of cards. There's the A, B, C card and the Z card. You're seeing it from the perspective of the red player, and these are the red jammer is trying to pass the opponent's blue blockers, and when that skater passes, they will score 1 point, which can be recorded on something like the scorecard. The other components include these turn track cards. It is based on the last 6 minutes of a tied game. So normally I start when I'm playing with people at 50-50 on both scores sheets. It's made up of rounds, or in roller derby terminology, jams, 1, 2, and 3. Randomly we draw some action disc and put 4 of those out here. Then the very first thing that happens when you start a round is you turn over this card, and both players will simultaneously roll these dice as fast as they can, similar to games like Escape. So you're rolling as fast as you can, and every time you get a star, it represents the jammer having passed one of the blockers. And so this would again be, so I've got 3 blockers have passed, and as soon as I get the 4th one, hopefully I'm doing that before the other person rolls. So it's a little bit of a dexterity game for the very first round. There we go. So if the red player had rolled 4 stars before the blue player had on their side, then they would become the lead jammer. They take the referee card to indicate that they're the lead jammer. It gives them a special power, which we'll go into. And they would also take these 4 discs, and they would choose 1 for theirs. The opponent chooses 1, then they choose a disc, and then their opponent chooses or takes the last remaining disc. And then these, thematically, these action discs are essentially what the blockers are doing to help the jammer get through the pack, and these dice are thematically how the jammer herself is skating to get around the blockers on the opposite team. Let's look at these cards in more detail. I'm only going to be explaining the rules for the basic game, and as such, only these cards with values 2, 4, 5, and 6, which is like a rating system within the game. There are other cards that allow you to play in the advanced game that have other combinations of icons on here. These cards are paired up with a skater card. These cards are separate from these cards with the icons deliberately, so that if a person has their own cards that they made, or they get trading cards from an actual roller derby team, they can take out this card and they can customize it with another player. There's no shuffling of these cards. These will be static through the basic game, while in the advanced game there's rotation of skaters between jams to the bench so that they can rest and become refreshed. There's also the possibility that somebody will become fatigued during the game and easier to pass, but those are all rules that are covered only in the advanced, and I'm not going to go into any more detail. In the game, the card game, roller derby final jams is played over 3 rounds or 3 jams, and I'm going to show you not necessarily a full first jam, but jams 2 and 3 are exactly the same in all the steps in the sequence and the setup. So if you see 1/3 of it, you've seen the full, everything that makes up the game. All right, so at the beginning of the round, we turned over this card. There's an iconography that describes essentially what's going on. This is like a clock at the top of this card. There's 2 minutes left in this jam. We represented moving the jammer through all of the blockers from card C all the way back around the track, back to C. We try to roll, and this is to remind that whoever gets 4 stars first will be awarded the lead jammer card. They'll take this card, and then they'll take half of the randomly seeded action discs that were in each of these rounds. So that happens 1 time. The next thing that happens is that you turn over the next card, And all of these cards, it's like a countdown. This is 1 minute and 40 seconds left in the jam. This stack looks like 10 minutes, or it's some number of seconds between each of those 10 turns. And only on the last 4 of these cards, in the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of the referee. And this reminds us during the game that only on these last 4 rounds can the lead jammer, if they haven't been penalized in some way, can call off the jam ahead of time. So it's not true that it necessarily will take all 10 of these cards. The lead jammer may be in a tactical position where it makes sense for them to actually, I'm ahead in points, the other person's about to score, and they would call the jam off, and then you would set up for jam 2 and then set up for jam 3 respectively. All right, so we flipped over the card with the number 10, 1 minute and 40 seconds left in this jam, and we're going to repeat these interim steps in this turn. We look, it's 1 minute, 40 seconds left. This little picture of this draw bag indicates that first thing that each player is going to do is look in and blindly pull out a disc to add to their the action disc in their pool available for them to use. The next thing that you do is you check to see whether or not there is a jammer beneath the C card. A little eyeball checking to see. If there is, and it will always be that case at the beginning of the jam, we reach for these cards. One person will take the jammer cards, one person will take the blocker cards, and in this case we'll let the lead jammer, the player with the lead jammer go first. They would select from these 3 cards, and this is a little bit like asymmetrical rock, paper, scissors. The payout is not equal for all choices when matched up. So the jammer is effectively choosing whether or not, turn these this way, whether or not they want their jammer coming up from behind the pack to go to the inside of the track, down the center, or to the outside. And depending on whether the blocker anticipates and puts most of their blockers in front of them, the payout is different. In the case that the blocker secretly chooses and reveals that they chose to block to the inside when the jammer did, then this skater will pass 0 blockers for free, is the way I like to describe it to people when I'm teaching them. So they won't have to roll the dice. By that I mean they won't have to roll the dice, and they won't have to expend any of these chips to get past some of the opposing blockers. Now, had the opponent chosen to block to the outside, thinking that's where the jammer would go, they would actually go past 3 of the blockers for free, not having to roll the dice or whatever, and you would move this card here to indicate that the jammer is then going after this one. So let's just randomly shuffle these and choose. Let's say that, again, that this jammer chose to go this way. All right, so let's say that reveals that the blocker chose to go this way. So in this case, the jammer gets past 1 of the blockers on the opposite side without having to roll the dice. You put it on the second one. These cards would be set aside, or actually in this case, they would switch the cards, and then on the other side of the table, the blue jammer player would be picking which way they wanted to go, and then they would pair up with a blocker, and maybe they would pass 1, 2, 3, 0 of the opponents. All right. Much of this game allows the players to play simultaneously, so there's very little downtime. And so continuing, let's say it was here, and the next thing that we see on the card that's for this part of the turn is that the jammer is going to start rolling these custom dice and matching them against these. Now, this is a good point to stop and explain how these different action discs work. The yellow discs are used essentially to get you out of going to the penalty box, and by penalty box I mean having one of your dice go to be locked and unavailable for play. So the yellow dice are indicated, or yellow discs are indicated by icons here, and that's how they're used. Now the other 3 colors can be used multiple ways. There's no blue disc in the pool right here, but the blue disc can be used, borrow one from here, to cover an icon, and that does the same effect as having to cover it with a dice, but if you cover it with a disc, you don't have to roll dice to cover it, and you'll have more dice available to get the remaining icons to cover them. The white ones can be used to cover the skulls, and if you have a red disc, borrow this one for a second, you can use it to cover a star. And they can be done in any combination, and you can even, if you have available discs, you can cover all of them and never roll or not roll the dice to get past that, but generally you don't want to spend the disc that way. Okay, so this was back here, put this over here. So in this case, let's say that the player decides that they will in fact cover the white skull with this disc, and then their turn is still going. Now they start rolling these dice. As long as, and in any order, they're able to cover at least one icon with the roll of the dice, they mark it as such, and they keep going. So now I'm trying to get a star. Okay, now in this case, I didn't roll the star. When you fail to get the star, you have several choices. You can, one, just stop your turn, you risk nothing, you just end, and we're going to flip another card, and then the next turn begins. Alternatively, you can choose to do what's called dirty skating. And the way that works is you just announce that I'm skating dirty, and then you roll, and as in this case, I failed. I didn't get a star in my die roll, so I would have to, as my penalty, put one over here in the penalty box. However, because I have these gold discs, I can actually put them here, and I pay the 2 gold, and effectively it goes back in my hand. Now whenever you fail at dirty skating and it it sort of invokes using this, whether you pay the disc or not, your turn does end. So let's say that that's the case, that the player chose to do it, they failed to do be successful at dirty skating, but they paid the 2 yellow. Now if the lead jammer does that, and I'm just using this as an illustration because this probably wasn't a good idea, the jammer who was the lead jammer, I'm sorry, yes, the jammer who was the lead jammer actually loses this. It goes back in the center, and they will not be able to turn or end the jam early on those last 4 cards in this deck. So here I set up a slightly different situation as an example. So let's say instead of the person who's on this side playing and saying, I'm going to skate dirty, and they failed, like in the last example, let's say that in their pool of available action discs they had more blue ones. I've put 4 out here. So another alternative, once you had failed, is not to immediately go to skating dirty. You can simply turn in any 2 color discs. The blue ones are the least useful, or probably of the lowest value. So you would normally, if you had them, choose 2 blue, but you can do them in any combination. A blue, a yellow, 2 reds if you want to, a white, it doesn't matter. So the skater says, I'm going to just pay the 2 blue. They go back into the pot, or into the bag, and then they get basically a free roll. You're just paying two discs to roll again. Okay, so in this case, it paid off. I rolled what I wanted to, and because I was successful, and now everything is covered, set these aside here, the jammer has scored against this blocker. Now, I found, similar to an actual roller derby, it actually makes more sense, and rather than just writing the score down every time you pass, is just wait till you get past all 4 of them at the end, and then record your score at 4 points. Unless at the end of the jam and you didn't get past everybody, you'd still get points for the ones that you passed. So, in this case, I rolled the star, successful, the jammer moves on to the next blocker, and this is all taking place in this same few seconds of actual real time. All of these dice go back into your hand once you pass somebody, and any disc that you use to cover would go back to essentially the bank or the draw bag. Okay, so and each time that you find yourself where you have not rolled yet, you then and only then can you choose to cover these icons at a cost of 1 disc per icon. I don't have any white disc, I don't have any red disc, so I can't choose that as an option. So I'm just going to go ahead and roll the dice, and I got a star. And then I'm successful, so I'm still rolling. Okay, I got both skulls on that single roll. So these come back in my hand, this moves on, it's still the same turn. And you can probably imagine at this point, if you're not stopping to explain it, this can go really fast, and it's very possible that you'll get past all 4 blockers, but not always, through a series of rolls and playing of these discs. Okay, so I roll again, I got a skull, I roll again, I didn't get anything. I could decide to well, say in this example, I decide I don't want to do anything, I want to just stop. But I could play, well, no, I play these 2 blue discs to get a free roll. Okay, I didn't get anything. Now I can decide, do I want to stop? I don't want to pay these 2 discs, but I'll do dirty skating. And now I'm risking a die going to the penalty box, but I do have 2 yellow ones to mitigate that. All right, so I got a star. Now, as soon as you're successful, then you're back to, you're not risking anything. It's like a normal roll. So on this thing, I'm not skating dirty, it's just a normal roll. Okay, I failed to get the star that I needed. Then I could pay 2 discs for a free roll, or stop, or do the dirty skating again. And as long as you have at least 1 to keep in your hand, with 1 going to the penalty box, you can do the you can risk the dirty skating penalty risk. Let's say I do that, and this time I fail. I'll pay the 2 yellows so that the dice goes here at the, it moves back to my hand. My turn is over, and then, but this is back in my hand because I paid the 2 yellows. Otherwise, it would take as many as 2 turns to get 2 turns to get back into my hand. Now, while the red skater was rolling their dice and playing their discs on here, the blue player was going, making the same option, and was playing on the same time. Once both players are done with this turn 10, you'd flip a card, and now there's 1 minute and 30 seconds left in the total jam, the first jam here in the game. And the next thing we would do is both players would reach in and randomly grab a disc to add to their pool. They would check to see whether or not either or both jammers were below the C card. They're not, so we skip the little phase where you compare the secretly selected jammer blocker cards for the rock, paper, scissors part of the game, and then you move on to rolling the dice again. Now, these, whatever progress you made at the end of your last turn remains there. So at this point, the person is starting with a free roll again and trying to get a star. Hey, I got a star. So I'd cover this. I successfully passed the last blocker. She moves to the Z card, and let's go into detail there. You would add points for each of the blockers that had been passed. So if we started at 50-50 at the beginning of the game, I'm at 54. And then the next thing you do is whenever the jammer gets all the way through the pack and gets to the Z card, your turn will end. But where the jammer ends up behind the pack depends on whether they have any white disc. The second use for the white disc is to do thematically a whip, or a friendly skater is grabbing your arm and giving you a tug and propelling you around the track faster, kind of catapulting you ahead. So if you don't have any white disc to turn in and you've passed the last blocker and you add the points, you simply put your jammer underneath the A card and your turn ends. If, however, you had 1 white disc to play, you can do a minor whip and you'll go immediately under the B card and your turn ends. Or finally, you'll go back to the C card, your turn ends, you pay the 2 white discs back to the bank. So it's very strategic, or one of the decisions you have to make is, usually you probably want to keep the white disc for that. It will really get you back in the game faster, but sometimes you'll want to play a white disc, not on these, but to cover these skulls. So let's talk about what happens when, let's say the person had none to play and they're at A. So you flip the next card over, and for this player, they would still pick a disc. Always do that at the beginning of each flipping of a card. They're not under the C card, so we skip this. And their whole move, when you're on the A card, is just to move to the B card. So you're catching up to the pack again from behind. Whereas the other skater might, their opponent may be somewhere in the pack, and they're rolling the dice and using the disc and maybe making progress and scoring points, or maybe not. Then the next time a card is flipped over, then the skater, all they'll do is move to the C card. And then on the next card, this is assuming that they didn't have the white disc, of course, to jump from Z all the way to C. The next time, they'll actually get to use the rock, paper, scissors cards for the jammer versus the blocker cards. And then that may put them some number of blockers for free, like maybe here. And then they'll roll their dice, use their disc that they picked up on each of those turns, and repeat the process of trying to cover and move to the next card. And that's basically the game. Again, there are advanced rules that involve fatigue. There's a little rondelle that's used instead of, which replaces the randomly drawing of the disc. Won't go into the details of that, perhaps in another video, but there is an alternative way of doing that that's kind of ties into the whether or not a skater does go fatigue or not. And then there's the managing of your team when they're tired or not tired between the jams, sending people to the bench, leaving them in tired, etc., etc. Okay, so let's recap. This is the prototype components of a game that's been in development for almost 2 years. Roller Derby Final Jams is very thematic. It's a 2-player only card game. It's basically a race game and with a lot of push or luck elements. You've seen how the basic game works. I mentioned the advanced rules. I might do another video explaining how the other components work for the advanced rules. There are, if you're playing the game as the typical game, made up of 3 different jams, but if the players decide that they only have 15 or 20 minutes and not maybe an hour to play the full 3 jams, then they could just decide to do sort of a death match and play a single jam, and you could just remove the components and go through the stack 1 time rather than 3 times. So if you were in roller derby and you had this game, you could certainly make or find cards that depicted you and your friends, and then you're in the game by simply taking these cards out and replacing them with trading cards. I hope you enjoyed this little overview, and again, there should be some other videos that explain other aspects of the game. One about how it relates thematically to the actual sport, and you might want to check or look for that as well. Thanks again.